the film that you've been working on for years takes a lot of grit to kind of figure out what the NFT and crypto space is, and then to put it in a documentary and then also apply some tokenization to it is very tough. Is this type of film going to be something that we see in the movie theaters? Is it something on Netflix? Is it something we're going to have to buy? Where is the distribution of this going to be channeled through?
That's still to be figured out. In my experience, what I've done with my films is I've independently financed, independently produced them, and then you premiere them at a film festival. Tribeca, Sundance, Berlin. Basically, at that festival then is when like the rights to distribute the film are negotiated. The film gets bought. Then it goes into theaters, and then it gets bought by streaming companies. That's what's happened to both of my films in the past. So my first film had a theatrical premiere and then was picked up by Netflix like globally for a few years.
Mike is good. We're ready. I'm here with Dan Sickles. He's new here. He's the director of We're New Here. And he also, for somebody being new, is already a co-host on a podcast with one of the OGs in this space, with Art Gnome. I've listened to a few episodes. I've minted the NFTs that come with it. So kind of a cool experience. We'll probably cover all of that. But man, Dan just literally slid into the industry and is already at the top.
Oh, whoa. I appreciate hearing that. Again, always new here, always listening. I feel like that's sort of like my role more or less in the space. And having the ability to do that with Jason through this podcast has been like a pleasure. The dankness is a lot of fun to make with him.
Do you feel like now that you are a co-host and you've talked with, I think you talked with Josie Bellini, there was a few other ones.
Zucker, Carlos Marcial.
Do you feel like this is now your home? Do you feel more integrated and you aren't actually new here? Maybe learning new things, but now you're actually part of culture. You're literally speaking on things that people outside of the culture would have no idea about.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, I am here, I think, for the very, very long term. But, I do sort of feel this responsibility, which is, everything that the entire New Here project is wrapped up in, to sort of help translate what it means to be here to people who aren't here, so to speak. And I think that, there's a huge learning process that anybody sort of needs to go through when they enter the space. And I feel like, doing whatever I can to sort of ease that transition is definitely an ambition of mine.
So if we're looking back then, as from the perspective of when you were new here, when was that? Was that before? Did you dabble into crypto before you decided to create this documentary? What was your first introduction to crypto?
Yeah, for sure. I first bought cryptocurrency in 2017. Got super into it then during that bull run, when it was going to change the world in 2017. And then, everything crashed in 2018. And like a lot of people who are in the space now sort of like forgot about it. And I was down so bad that I didn't sell anything. I just sort of closed my Coinbase account on my phone and just didn't really look at it for what ended up being probably 2.5 years. And then I remember seeing a few articles about CryptoKitties and like these weird cartoons that were like clogging a thing called a blockchain. Because again, I think when I first bought Bitcoin, I didn't know what it was that I was buying. I sort of I knew that it was digital money, and I knew that it was fixed, and I knew that it was like a bit it was less obscure than the traditional sort of financial structure, right? And that's what attracted me to it. But I didn't really know anything about blockchain. And yeah, seeing CryptoKitties, all of that, it if anything, it made the whole space more laughable and absurd initially. I was like, what are these kitties doing on this chain? And why are people even writing about them? So again, kind of like sat there and like mulled on it. And then I remember coming across like a few things about CryptoPunks when they started to creep up into sort of like the more mainstream press. And any holder will tell you like there is something pretty enigmatic about that collection. And I was drawn to it and drawn to the history of it. And at that point, it was, I think, Christie's had just announced that they were going to be doing a sale, and I was also really curious as to why this sort of ancient auction house was climbing in to this particular space that was also related to kitties on a chain, and none of it made sense. But I think like that's always for me like a really good sort of seed. It's a way in, like it's a naturally curious sort of spark that like leads me to places that I wouldn't expect. And that's what I've always been doing as a filmmaker. I'm not really a tech guy. I'm not a financial like sort of whiz. I don't really come from that space at all, as much as I do really sort of working to demystify invisible and marginalized communities. That's really where most of my work has lied for the past decade.
Wow, it's quite beautiful. Yeah, I see. For those that are listening, behind Dan, you can see there's a book called Pixel. He has probably some of your past work that you've done new here with some of the NFT avatars, which we'll get into. But what is the last 10 years of your documentary and kind of film career? And was there anything even before that that was your kind of intro to being this type of expressive creator?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. If anything, I trained as an actor. I was acting for a while in New York City. Did like a few film and TV stuff. If anybody's like seen High Maintenance, I'm in a few episodes of High Maintenance. But a lot of those projects I was making with friends back in the day, and had like a pretty serendipitous experience where basically I ended up at a bar that turned into a drag show one night in Austin, Texas. And there was this one drag performer that was just doing something that nobody else was doing. She was like running around with like a frying pan that had like a face on it. And sort of like, if you've ever seen John Waters and the work that he was making with Divine, who's a very famous drag queen, it was very much in that vein, sort of like shock art. Not an effort to be a beautiful queen. It was very different, very threatening and scary. And I just went up to her afterwards and I was like, hey, like, who are you? Like, I'm Dan. Her name was Maggie McMuffins, and we just hit it off. And I ended up spending like 2 days with her at her place, like sort of like asking her questions, and we ended up making like this short film together. And while spending time with her, as happens with anybody, like the stories just sort of unravel, right? I mean, like they do in a podcast, right? And that's what happened there. And, it turned out that she was like in the middle of her transition. She was transitioning to a woman, and she was still married to her wife, and they had a 9-year-old daughter. And there was this whole story that just sort of like came out of seemingly nowhere for me. That in that moment, I was like, this is something. And like, if I can continue to sort of find myself in a situation where like I'm in someone's living room, like learning about what it's like to be them, knowing that them and their experience is so different from mine, then that's gold. And yeah, that was sort of like the beginning of the end for me. Like, cause directing films, directing nonfiction films, it's not like an easy career to build. Right. But there's nothing like it. So, I mean, I really like literally left that house and I was like, there's something here. I need to pursue this. Like, I don't really understand what this experience is like. So let's figure it out. And my team and I, that's when we got started on my first film, began that in like 2012, and spent the next 3.5 years making it. And it's called Mala Mala, that premiered in 2015 in movie theaters. And from there, went straight into making my second film, which is called Dina. And that premiered in 2017 at the Sundance Film Festival, and then premiered in theaters all over the world that year. And yeah, since then, I've been doing like a lot of writing. I've been doing a lot of development. I've made some small things like here and there, some music videos, some stuff with friends. But it really wasn't until crypto and falling back into the NFT space that like I really found that same like, oh shit, like something is here. Like I need to commit to figuring this out. in a way that I know how, and that just like happens to be making a movie, you know. Um, I mean that's sort of like the shorter version of the past 10 years.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure there's a lot to it. I know, especially making films, as I've looked through your history. You mentioned it took about 3 years to make one of them, 2 years to make one. You've been kind of working on this one for 1.5 to 2 years, in and out. There's a lot of precision that has to go into it. For We're New Here, what are the main differences between developing we'll just call it a traditional nonfiction film versus the crypto version of it?
yeah, that's a really good question. Because it's wild. Like it's like again, like making an independent film already. It's like you know, like you're trying to like parallel park a submarine in a desert. Like none of it makes sense, but you're just trying to do it. You're trying to make it happen. But like working in this realm is also in particular because it's super public. It's like right now I'm giving an interview about a film that like literally as soon as I hop off of this, I'm going to head back into writing it, which is really silly because like it's so public. You know, I've committed to making this in such a way that everyone knows that I'm doing it, which is very different. Sort of up until now, it's like been a small team and the people in front of the camera that know that like this might be a thing that, you know, turns out to be something that people are actually watching one day. But now it's sort of the scale of it. It's very new, and the amount of messages that I get, and sort of handling all of that is very new to me too. And it's also something that I encourage. Like, you know, I don't want anyone who's listening to this to think that like I'm unreachable, because it's actually the opposite. Like I do spend a lot of time trying to know what I don't know. Because if I'm going to sort of like say in any kind of real way that like I'm making a film about this space or about this movement or about this moment in time, it's super important that I work to know it as well as I can, and that I study it as well as I can and as deeply as I can. So yeah, all of that is very new to me. I mean, there's also the, you know, the aspect of like fundraising using a currency that is changing, you know, every second relative to the currency that you're paying vendors in. That's also wildly new. I mean, we finally got an accountant after a year that is like really confident that they can handle all of this in regards to production with fiat and crypto, and like when it comes to the revenue coming in from the NFT project and then sending it out to the artists. It's like all of those things. It's all new. So that's all being invented on top of the language for a film about an entirely new space. So
quite a mountain on your hands that you have to overcome. So
I asked for all of it.
I mean, if we're going to refine it and try to find, you know, maybe the first hole to go through this mountain, like where do you even begin to start as somebody who has no idea where to even begin? Did you approach it through the lens of a project? Did you reach out to individuals to try to get a gauge on what was going on? How did you first approach it? And also define when that was for those who aren't aware.
So I first put together a short film concept called The Enigma of the CryptoPunks. And it was going to be a short film about punks leading to the Christie sale. And I thought that it was a perfect idea to sell to somewhere like Vox or the Times or you know, any place that like commissions short work, because it's a really cool combination of tech, art, culture, and sort of would hit the base of their readership, I assumed, right? No one picked this up. Like no one was interested. But in like a lot of the conversations that I was having with production companies, there was this natural curiosity, right? I think like whenever anybody, I mean, it's harder to find people nowadays who are like willing to authentically listen to anyone talk about NFTs who knows NFTs, right? But then it was sort of like there was sort of okay, this guy, he seems to know something, so we're going to ask him about things that have nothing to do with the short film that he's pitching. And just by that alone, I would sort of like get out of these meetings, and I'd be like, okay, like there is something here, because like everyone's still asking about what's going on, even though like they know that they can't commit to like backing it with any like funds that would allow me to produce a film about the subject matter, right? So I just continued to develop it, like just like doggedly. Again, like just purely based on like that spark that I was like, there's something here that like we need to figure out, and that I need to really sort of understand for myself. And I put a small team together. I hit up a few discords about the concept and like kind of like put together my initial team. One of my producers, Chill Zone, is also one of my DPs on the project. I connected with him in the Meebits DAO Discord. Another one, Shane Boris, I connected with while hanging out with Justin Aversano in LA. So it all sort of like naturally built. The first money that I got for the film was from Kai, who famously cracked like the CryptoKitties code in like 2018. And again, it's from him responding on like the Meebits DAO Discord being like, oh, hey, cool, this concept is interesting, whatever. And with that money, we set up shop at like the first NFT NYC of, what year was it? Was it
2020? First NFT NYC was 2019. The Christie's CryptoPunk sale was in 2021. So that's probably what you're referring to.
Yeah, I mean the first one of that year, because like there was the year of NFT NYC where they had two.
They had that one that was in November. I was at that one, yeah, and then they had it literally 6 months later for the 2022 one.
Yeah, that's it. So like that first one, we rented a studio, and we invited a bunch of people to come. Like I hit people up on the internet, artists that I really appreciated and had collected, just to see if they would talk to me. And that's really how I went about it. And that was like a whole learning process in of itself, right? Like no one in Web3 necessarily cares about like the credentials of Sundance or like the films that I've made in the past. Like it's just kind of like, okay, well, what are you doing in Web3, right? And I'm like, well, I'm trying to make a film about Web3, right? So, it was a bit of a dance, but people showed up. I mean, like I was so grateful for like that first group of interviews that turned out, and I got some incredible perspectives. Like it's like that group was, Fuck Render, Giselle Flores, G Money, Jimmy came. There was, I mean, it was so varied too. And I had 4 days to just sort of like grab people that I could and time that they would give me, and really just ask questions, all of my questions, and like listen. And then from there was like, okay, cool. Like, how do I continue to build this out in a way that would maybe make sense to somebody else, or fill this out in a different way? And that's really what we continue to do, during different events, and in different locations all over the world for like the next 16 months.
Isn't it crazy, as you go through the crypto space, you learn that the world is built off this idea of meritocracy, of just like what you've done is build your credibility. And it applies in Web3, but only to the things that have happened in Web3. You could be, this big influencer come in and no one really cares because they see you as a cash grab, because that's kind of what happens. They want to see what you've built into Web3. You could literally be, quote unquote, nobody in the real world and then come here and be an absolute somebody and be big.
I mean, like the rules are what they are, right? Like, I mean, I will openly admit that like I bought my CryptoPunk on the basis that I knew that it would help get me access to certain parts of this ecosystem to make the film. By that point, like I had only committed to buying a crypto baby book, and that was like the first like community that I spent a lot of time in, and like they're an incredible community. But there was a certain point in which I knew that you need to display your commitment to this space, right? And like especially as a filmmaker, like, I mean, we see it now, and we're going to continue to see it as things explode even further. Like, there's going to be a lot of filmmakers, a lot of journalists, a lot of people who come in from the outside and say, like, "Hey, I have really good intentions. Like I would like to make a film about this space, and a lot of that media is going to films and articles and stuff like that, written from the outside looking in, you know.
Yeah.
And if I'm also somebody hitting people up on the internet being like, hey, like I want to make a film about the space, da, 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 like words can only really get you so far. And like there does come a certain point where it's like, okay, but what is in your wallet? Like what have you interacted with? I think now in 2023, it's not necessarily such a specific question of like what you own or what your PFP is. I think people have been able to find different ways of expressing themselves, but at that point, it seemed as though like the space was, it was still in this place that it was just like you needed that tribal banner in order to be like, hey, I'm committed. Like I dropped, you know, this amount of money on this JPEG. Like, yeah, I'm in on the joke. So now can we talk?
Yeah, the social signaling, it still exists, and it's probably exacerbated in the space, but it's kind of migrated. If it's migrated to different aspects of the industry as it's evolved, right? It was originally just kind of like what you see is what you get. If you own a CryptoPunk, this guy has status. Now it's kind of moved to, you know, ENS is your decentralized identity, or are you in the music NFT industry, right? Or are you in the derivatives or whatever the kind of NFT community that exists. For example, like I'm myself and Adam McBride, who's featured in the documentary. We were kind of born and molded in the historical NFT community, which is kind of niche within itself, right? That community has its own battles that it has to go through, just as the PFP ones do, just as social tokens and all of these other ones. But then as you, who's been filming this now for about 2 years, you've probably touched at least every single sector or category that exists within the NFT space. How do you navigate something like this? Do you go in, do you approach every different community, for example, PFPs, art, photography, etc.? Do you take the same approach to every single one, or do you know that there's a different culture within every single classification, and that you have to be more approachable within it?
Yeah, no, I mean, every community is its own flavor and is expressive of its own particular new techno-futuristic value system, right? I mean, like, and you can see the tone of it, you can hear the tone of it in interviews as we're putting these things together, right? So like right now I have an assembly of rare pepes that is probably like an hour and 45 minutes of people talking about rare pepes, right? And I have a 2.5-hour assembly of CryptoPunks, right? And the language that people are using to talk about those projects it's just different, right? And in terms of telling the story, and in terms of how that affects the story, it's sort of like, you know, what CryptoPunks did for identity in Web3, like CryptoVoxels did for space in Web3, and Rare Pepes, I think, did for community and fun in Web3, right? And sort of like perpetuating this idea of a citizen art movement happening in Web3. I mean, what Rare Pepes, I've learned so much from that group.
Comes into every conversation. It's they're generally the ones who've done it first. I think XCopy has that famous tweet where it's like, if you think you've done something first, Rare Pepes probably already did.
No, they like absolutely they have. And yeah, I mean, I have Joe Looney, I think, saying that, or actually it might be Jason Bailey saying that in the interview for the film, but it's absolutely true. I mean, yeah, a lot of the experimentation happened within that group. There's also Dada NYC that was happening around the same time, and you know that was also, you know, really playing around with you know, value systems and bringing communities together online to create. But you know, these communities have again a different value proposition, I guess is one way to phrase it, than something like Bored Apes or I mean, I don't know what's coming out today, or anything that Art Blocks is offering too, you know, to put it another way. And I think that like what's interesting in terms of storytelling is sort of like looking at how all of these value systems are interacting with each other and sort of dancing in the same arena together. That it isn't really about anybody sort of like contesting one another in like a in a deep sense as much as it is like playing with one another and using this tech to like really create these new communities and these new systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So as somebody then who's dabbled through all the different communities, on your website, you note a lot of notable figures from, as you mentioned, like Jimmy and Snowfro and all these different individuals. Are there any similar characteristics you see between all of these leaders of all these different communities? Because I mentioned this on Twitter, it seems like it's all very tribal. Everyone's kind of against each other. Everyone's fighting for attention and money. But once you get into these like individual conversations, it feels like everyone's kind of on the same page. It's just like, it's such a stark contrast between the in-person dialogue between two people in the space and the dialogue that happens on Twitter. So I was curious from your perspective, what are some of the similarities and or differences you see between the leaders of all the different communities?
That's a really good question. And honestly, like this points to sort of like, I'm swimming in the middle of all of these questions right now, to be honest. And like working to synthesize a lot of those answers in the film itself. Like, I think that when it comes to a lot of these leaders, I think that like a lot of people, the thing that is consistent is that there's been a desire to find something new to believe in. Something a bit more secure than anything that has existed in the past, right? Like there is something evangelistic about this space, right? And yeah, I think that really carries throughout. I think that there is nuance though in how people prioritize, again, what values are offered by this technology, whether it's decentralization or whether it's the opportunity to, financially benefit in like an absurd way on an insanely exponential
Came for the tech, staying for gains. That's always been the quote ever since I got into it. But you know, it's opposite. And sorry to interrupt you. Is when I first got into crypto in 2016, right, for Bitcoin, that was the kind of common cliche was came for the tech, stayed for the gains. And now it's kind of the opposite with NFTs where it's like came for the gains, stayed for the tech. It's kind of flipped a little bit because most people who I've met who've got into NFTs come to flip because they hear of a Bored Ape selling for 500 grand and they're like, whoa, how do I do that? But then once they start getting into the culture and the community side of it, they stay. And it's just that it's all, again, another interesting difference that I see. I try to make a lot of these like parallels and differences, try to help understand. It's impossible to really completely understand it because everyone, as you said, has their own value system that they kind of apply to the blockchain in a different way. But man, dude, it's fun. It's fun. It's a never dull day.
Yeah, no, it's a blast. And I mean, like that is sort of like, I mean, that's the nature of it. That's what makes it thrilling and scary, which often go hand in hand, right? And I think that is part of the draw, right? I'm curious to sort of see how these systems mature into truly new systems. You know, I think like a lot of what we see that gets a lot of attention still is sort of a mirror image to what has gotten a lot of attention in the past, right? Some of the most popular projects are projects that are sort of touted by traditional celebrities and traditional Silicon culture, right? Like, why is that? Like, a lot of the highest sales are coming from white guys. A lot of the biggest collectors are white guys. Like, so it's like, but there are new things happening within this. Like, there are streams happening within this, like, you know, wider river where it's like, that is new and like that is innovative. And like somebody who generationally is used to losing is actually winning. Like, and those things I'm actually much more interested in than, you know, like, why X was, you know, this massive success because like, oh, well, it just looks like the same exact thing that happened before NFTs existed, right?
Yeah. The cultural and stereotypical, you know, things that exist in the real world do apply to the crypto world. It's a different demographic, but unfortunately, you know, things like, I don't know if this is still true. I think so though. Like usually the floor of the crypto punks and Meebits are generally like the colored ones. And it's generally, I think it's generally because people are trying to pick out their PFPs that look like them. And as you say, and it's generally dominated by, like middle-aged American males who are white. And so they're generally like kind of lacking for it. And it makes you think of like, how do you get past that? Is the barrier to crypto too high? Is it because there's such like a value proposition that's attached to it that, to buy a CryptoPunk, you need $100,000 or a Bored Ape, right? Or you have to be there early and have to basically slave away at allow list antics to try to get on this allow list, right? To get up there to that kind of idea. Have you explored any of these topics in your film?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, this is like sort of like what I'm trying to sort of figure out, what, the notions of digital ownership and network effects and how that has manifested in what's happened in like the past few years, for sure. I think like when it comes to adoption, I think the biggest obstacle, and again, something I'm swimming in right now, is like how we make all of this tech and all of the memes and these meme economies, which are so much fun. How do we make all of that relevant to the lives of people who don't have expendable incomes? Mm-hmm. People who like will actually balk at a $15 gas fee because like you can buy dinner for $15 in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why would I spend that on a transaction? Like, so I think, reducing a lot of like the noise of like, yeah, CryptoPunk is this amount of money, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, sure. Like a Lambo is this much money too, but that doesn't matter if nobody knows what a car can do. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that like a lot of my work and part of why I'm so inarticulate today and like the past few days, because I'm swimming in all of this, I feel like is like, how do we reduce what's happening here to those core components so that Uncle so-and-so or grandma blah, blah, blah can be like, oh, okay, like that makes sense for me in this way, And I think that like right now, just a lot of that is obscured by talk of floor price, by like lingo that is switching so fast and like new meta and blah, 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 blah. And like how much money is moving around and all of that's well and good because it's cool when people get rich. Right. But,
no, it's only cool. It's only cool when you get rich. When other people get rich, then you have to fund them, right?
But for me, really, I mean, like, I want to, I've spent years working with sex workers in Puerto Rico. Like, at the end of the day, I want them to know why it's relevant for them to have a crypto wallet, like what that offers them, as opposed to putting cash in a Chase bank account or, like giving it to any of the other like large banks who have consistently fucked them over. Like that to me is actually the concern more than, sort of like
Paris Hilton buying a Bored Ape. Yeah.
I mean, I do think there's something really captivating and interesting about that moment in terms of pop culture, right? Because it does show how things function and sort of like the trickle down economy of like the celebrity industrial complex, and who sells what and what's effective in a market. And how, like those are things that we really get to, that I have gotten to see. And that, again, I'm trying to sort of shed light on because I'm also speaking with artists in Iran. I'm also speaking with artists in Senegal and, it's all over the world. And like Paris Hilton isn't on the radar for what they're trying to do in Senegal right now. Like, it's like, like they're hosting real events that are onboarding artists into the space and doing that real education that needs to happen, and part of like that sort of, again, celebrity culture, it's not part of what's happening over there. So part of what we get to sort of see is how different cultures use this technology to communicate and to manifest themselves. Over here in the West, in the States, it's like literally touting out all of our celebs to tell us why we should be buying something. I mean, we do that for water here. That's not the same everywhere else in the world. And sort of getting to see how other places in the world are using this tech. Working with artists in Iran who are anti-authoritarian artists, like making anti-regime art and like basically doing it under a pseudonym and like putting it on chain. And like, that's actually how they're able to make a living and be safe that's so much more interesting, I think.
Right. Then in America, where the progression of crypto has become more about status and wealth, and then in
flatter,
and flatter, yeah. And then in the developing countries, it's more about decentralization and political speech, and sending a message, self-sovereignty. Yeah. So then, for those, if we're watching the video, how does, or the documentary, I should say, how does the film address these complications? Is it through conversation? Is it through animation? Is there some visual components to it? How is that addressed through film?
Yeah, I mean, so the film is being told from the experience of a new user entering the scene, right? So similar to my own experience, I think a lot of us had sort of a similar kind of onboarding experience. I mean, I didn't have anybody in my real life who was very into what was happening in crypto. So I spent a lot of time by myself on the internet, watching lots of videos, a lot of bad videos, some good videos, but that's sort of the perspective of this film, and sort of our Alice kind of like falling into Wonderland. And then hanging out there and like getting to meet, this insane cast of characters who sort of share their part of sort of what is contributing to this insanely powerful circus of a space, right? And part of that, I mean, is again through that character's journey, which will have an arc. That our audience will sort of get to experience firsthand, but it's also told in the sort of oral history moments, right? I've done about 100 interviews over like the past 16 months, most of them happening in studio, some of them happening in virtual. Yeah, that makes sense. But like really working to build out this network of players, so that when one person starts to speak about a story or a pivotal moment that happened in the space, like there's voices that are echoing that sentiment or carrying on the story in particular ways, so that we're actually visualizing the network of who was there when, right? And in terms of how we're addressing sort of like these cultural differences, I mean, I'd say that it's not necessarily anything that I have to point to as a director. Like I don't have to editorialize all that much, because a lot of it is in the language. Like, when you interview somebody, the way that they speak, and I'm digging my own grave saying it, it says everything, right? I mean, like, it's like the camera doesn't really lie, and I'm not asking them to do anything other than tell me their side of the story. So, like, something that I've noticed is really just how language has changed from the people who were involved in the space years ago versus people who came into the space, a year ago, a year and a half ago. The role of the influencer, for example, like that didn't exist when CryptoPunks came around. Like in these early communities, like I mean, I guess there were micro influencers within these communities, right? But as far as a social media influencer as a job coming into a space and selling product, that's still relatively new. And like, and sort of seeing how that affects language and how we talk about this space, which is so affected by social media and particular players. Again, it's all there. It's like something that is, as an audience member, you might hear or you might not, but it's in the way that the story is being told, right?
Yeah, watching
Lower
the
prices,
watching the crypto industry evolve, but also kind of repurpose the same ideas is interesting. Because in 2017, the influencers were really those who were kind of shilling ICO bags at the time, right. And then in 2021, 2022 was when I really realized that the NFT influencers much more powerful than what those ICO shillers were, comparative to in 2013, those that were shilling new blockchains and and altcoins was kind of like the beginning of that. And so it's grown a little bit over time and migrates to the different technologies that are built on it. But I think why it's so prevalent in NFTs is because there's a heavy association of the non-fungibility of, we'll use Paris Hilton again, right? Paris Hilton bought this Bored Ape, so therefore that collection has a higher distinction of credibility, but also she can she could take that Bored Ape and find relation to it, and other people can because Paris Hilton owns this, right? It's like her when she owns these different name brand bags that or shoes, right? That
of course.
People go and buy that because she does, but then they go buy that specific type of shoe because they want to feel as close to her as possible. So they say, hey, if Paris has these pink Nikes, then I'm going to go buy those pink Nikes because we have similar taste in a sense.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if they still do this, and I might be misspeaking, but I'm pretty sure in the UK they used to, or they still do, sort of like put the Queen's seal on items that like she prefers. So it's like her favorite chocolate, her favorite blah blah blah. Like they all have her sort of stamp of approval on them, so that like as a consumer, when you're like sort of shopping for chocolate, you can see that one is associated with royalty and the Queen. So, I mean, like it's always been something that has been sort of built into how we've interacted, right? Yeah.
Then if we play the flip side of social impact and change, does the film address any of the fraudulent and malicious behavior that's in the industry? As we know, this is always a common topic, and it seems like it's grown even more. Most of the Twitter spaces today are all like Web3 exposed, right? And this person's actually run by a bot farm, and this ring is this scamming ring. Does the film tackle that at all?
Yeah, I mean, insofar as like acknowledging that like it's an aspect of this culture that exists, right? And I guess I phrase it that way because I don't see it being the film's responsibility or it being possible to sort of like take any of that out of the culture by virtue of exposing it in a film, right? I think that like with self-sovereignty and with everything I think that this tech offers comes an enormous amount of responsibility. And like, if anything, I think that is also really the message, like who are you listening to? And you get to choose, if anything, in this space, like you really do get to choose. And people have different interests and they express them in different ways. And like, I think that it's important to sort of navigate as you see it, and that's sort of as best as anybody can do, but at least the options are sort of available, you know?
Yeah, personally, I kind of like the chaos. I know some people don't. There's maybe I just become so immune to the scammy behavior, or I'm just able to identify it. Anytime there's an expose of some sort of scam ring and they post all these profiles and projects, I'm not familiar with like any of them. Like I'm living in like my own complete bubble that is just like unaware of everything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, this might be controversial, but like exploiting of a new and vulnerable system, I feel like is such a human, like it would piss me off. Like if I knew somebody that robbed somebody, or if I got robbed, like it's like it pisses me off. Absolutely. But I don't think it's unexpected. Mm-hmm. Like it's why we have locks on doors, right? Like, but what does really piss me off, not that you asked, but
controversial point number 2. Let's go, Dan.
is when people who should know better make outsized, extraordinary promises to people who are coming into a space trying to learn about it and trying to do that in an authentic way, and sort of like leveraging irrelevant experience or again inflated numbers or whatever it is in order to push a product on people and then sort of like quietly back out. That infuriates me. Because like I feel like I did witness it. I felt like I witnessed like this because I climbed in like just before everything got like nuts. And I remember when like all the superlatives started, and I remember when Def Beef made the superlative project, which was brilliant, like making a comment on all the bullshit superlatives that flew into the space. But like it has continued in this way that it just it worries me because I see people becoming more and more adept at language and words. in ways that, again, are sort of like manipulative, but aren't necessarily backed by anything real. And when we're already like talking about like virtual objects, which like, are only tangible insofar as we can really push theoretically, like it's important to deliver on what you're saying that you're going to do, and to not like promise the world to people who are showing up, like I think very often, again, looking to find faith in a new system, right? And that sort of dynamic, I just hate to see it exploited.
The leverage that exists in the system is more than just the financial assets. There's a ton of social leverage, as you mentioned, that influencers use, whether it's they're leveraging the trust that they've built between their community, or the credibility that they've built outside of it. There's many ways to go around it, to capture that attention and then leverage it in malicious behavior. But what the leverage also does do is introduce like a ton of innovation, right? That's why we see these like massive exponential breaks upwards because of the new innovation that could come because of how fast everything's moving. You yourself are kind of in this like innovative area where you're doing this crypto film, which there's not many that exist. There's a handful. When I got into crypto in 2017, one of the first films I watched was like a Bitcoin documentary. It was called
The Rise and Rise of Bitcoin.
So that one, or I think the one was called like Banking on Bitcoin or Breaking Bitcoin or something like that. There was a few of them that came out, and I was just talking about, Satoshi and Silk Road and all that. Now you get to dive into the NFTs. You've also, you have your own NFT collection. That's a component of the film. That's, I believe, maybe one of the only few. I know from the historical community, there was one called Homo Deus in 2018, which I believe is like the first one that was using NFTs to kind of fund filming. Then you had Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis did the Stoner Cats thing. Right. And then you're maybe like 3 or 4, right? So you're out on the innovative curve on yourself. What is the point of the NFT and how is it pertinent to the film?
Yeah. Another great question. Before that, I guess to add a bit of context is like, I spent the better part of 8 months exploring with a legal team how to turn this film into a securities offering using crypto. So the initial intent, actually, and something that I'm still trying to figure out how to crack in a more seamless way, is like how we can create, sort of, again, like these fundraising techniques that are leveraged using communities for art projects that require resources up front, right? Film, TV, opera, theater, and yeah, it was enormously expensive, enormously time consuming. We know what questions need answering, and we know what avenues to pursue. But at the end of the day, it was like, I need to make this film, right? Like I don't want to spend all of my time right now sort of like working through this legal problem. So something that we did, we had already been making these pixelated characters for the entire cast, and we were like looking at a few of these generative projects, and I think it kind of struck the team and I that like this is actually the perfect route to go. Also because we could be using smart contract tech to cut the artists in sort of right away on the sales. So something that's happening with this project too, and something that I've never been able to do in nonfiction in general, but something like that plagues the genre and like that the nonfiction film industry has forever, is sort of like, where does the compensation sit for the people in front of the camera, right? Like very often, like they're lending their stories to the filmmaker, and 99% of the time, they're like the last to be considered after the film is sold and done and whatever. And it's like, oh, well, how do we pay them, and this is actually like a situation that does resolve a lot of that, right? Like sort of the flywheel built into the project, it sort of like creates the situation where like the better the project does, like, the better all of us do. And that's one part of it. But, like the idea then was really to generate a bunch of characters based on all of the traits of our cast, which again, at the time, like there was a lot of division, like we had just sort of like hit a slump, and everybody was at each other's throats more or less, and everyone hated AI, and it was like this weird moment. And and then we dropped this project to sort of also sort of holistically celebrate like the best of the space, right? So that like you hit mint, and that like you actually generate an avatar that's a combination of like disparate characters within this ecosystem, as a way of just like naturally being like, well, this is what our team looks like, this is what this crew looks like, right? So it's just like it's a very natural way of celebrating who they are and what they've brought to the space. And then also off the back of that, like we've been doing these really cool artist collaboration drops, right? So that are all free too, which I think is important to stress, because it's like I like this project for skeptics, because it's like as long as you own a newbie, as long as you have token, like then you can participate in the artist collaboration drops, and they're not going to cost you anything other than gas, right? So if you hold a token for the next year and a half and longer, I mean, as we're rolling this film out, like you'll be able to pretty naturally build a thoughtfully curated NFT collection for virtually free, right? So we're using it as an onboarding sort of mechanism too, so that like, cool, get this token, then you can hop into the Discord, do all those things that all the other NFT projects offer. But then, every 4 to 6 weeks, like you're going to meet another artist and get to collect their work. And then, all of the revenue until we hit our budget, that 85% is going to supporting the film. And going towards realizing the budget for the project, which is, again, I guess, based on everything we've said so far, I hope people understand, is pretty ambitious. So yeah.
Yeah, I believe the mint, was it 5,000 tokens, 8,000 tokens in the NFT collection, and it's about half minted out, or maybe like a little bit past.
Yeah, it's about half minted out. Well, what we've done is we've actually held back 3,000 tokens, because what I'm going to do is, once the film is complete, we actually have to update the traits. So then like people can then mint those last 5,000, and it will be the entire cast will be included then in the full collection. So yeah, we're about half minted out right now. I think that we've minted just over 4,000. Congratulations.
As we've discussed, the film that you've been working on for years takes a lot of grit to kind of figure out what the NFT and crypto space is, and then to put it in a documentary, and then also apply some tokenization to it is very tough. Is this type of film going to be something that we see in the movie theaters? Is it something on Netflix? Is it something we're going to have to buy? Where is the distribution of this going to be channeled through?
Yeah, so that's still to be figured out. Like in my experience, what I've done with my films is I've independently financed, independently produced them, and then you premiere them at a film festival, Tribeca, Sundance, Berlin, and basically at that festival then is when like the rights to distribute the film are negotiated. The film gets bought, right? And then it goes into theaters, and then it gets bought by streaming companies, and that's what's happened to both of my films in the past. So my first film had a theatrical premiere and then was picked up by Netflix like globally for a few years. I think my second film is still sitting with Hulu. I think Hulu still has the North American rights.
Play it.
For distribution.
Play it for us so we can get a little bit of preview.
Yeah. I got to pull it up. I think it's still there. But
so what kind of impact are you hoping for this to have? Is it hoping to onboard individuals to Web3? Is it to celebrate the culture? I'm sure you're probably trying to touch multiple things at one time, but what is the overall objective?
No, I think a lot of it's to demystify this space and like what's going on in here, make it less scary and sort of like more inviting, sort of like try to ignite that curiosity in other people. And I think like there's a bunch of different ways of doing that, right? So like the film is going to feel sort of like the internet, right? Like it's not very consistent in terms of aesthetic or approach all the time. So like there might be an interstitial that's a bit more informative, or like there might be a particular experience that an artist is talking about that is something that somebody can like latch onto and understand a bit better. So there's going to be these multiple access points that I'm building out for audiences when they experience this film.
And is there an ETA?
There is an ETA. No, the film is going to be ready in 2024. So definitely expect it next year. I'm in the editing process right now, and then after that, I'm like headed into deep like VFX animationville, and that's going to be the better part of this year for me. But the film, not to say too much, but there are going to be pieces of it that people will be able to see publicly soon, and sort of get more of a taste for like what it's looking like and like the extent to which we're really building out these worlds. But it's pretty spectacular. I'm really, really excited for people to see kind of what this film looks like, because it's not a traditional doc at all.
I'm excited, man. Do you guys hear that? You're gonna have to get the NFT to get that early access. So just hear it here first. As we put the bookends to kind of this podcast. We started with the Dang Tone podcast that you started with Jason Bailey, who's known as Art Gnome. I wanted to just know a little bit more through the first few episodes of what the experience is like, and is there any utility to this NFT that I've been minting for every episode?
I love Jason Bailey. I met him in person for our interview. I interviewed him in Texas, and I think I kept him in the chair for like 3.5 hours. And it was when we were just getting ready to roll out the NFT project that he hit me up and was just like, I had this thought, whatever. And he's the only person in the planet that could suggest like a podcast, that I would say yes to. Okay, cool. Like I'll do this with you. And he's the best. He's incredibly down to earth, incredibly generous, so smart, but like not at all pretentious. I trust him a lot. And he's taught me a lot. And the podcast it's been so much fun. I think like what we're trying to do, it's very similar to this, is just like have like, real conversations with people who are still hustling in the space. And are sort of well-intentioned as we see it. And then as far as the mints, like the mints on async that we're doing for every episode, like we have some ideas down the road for people who are holding full sets, particular sets, all of that, but definitely don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And like, I think that me and Jason, when it comes to that project and the particular mint, I think that like our intention of creating any sort of market action with this, it is very much at the bottom of the list. So we want to keep things accessible. We want to keep things fun. We want to, build the Dank Tones as a way of collecting the podcast along with us as it's coming out. But yeah, I wouldn't doubt Jason Bailey when it comes to free NFT offers.
Yeah, I've been minting them. I think they're literally like $3 to mint or something like that. It's like
they should be less.
It's like effectively free, if I remember.
Yeah, what we did, we priced them. I think it's like 0.0001 or something, basically to avoid bots. It's what async sort of said that we should do so that like it doesn't totally get out of control. But yeah, they're virtually free plus gas. If that's an issue for anybody and you really, really want to collect a Dank Tone, just like hit me up. I mint a bunch every single time and would be happy to send you one.
I'm going to have to start doing this too. I also wanted to mention that Stella is on the show. She's like the mixer. I've had Stella on this podcast as well. So I could not, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that she's involved in that as well.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. So is she actually on the screen with you guys, or she's just in the background making some noise, or she do the remix after? Stella Bell, right?
Yeah, Stella Bell's not our mixer.
Oh, it's a different one.
But she's mixing your show?
No, I thought it was. Don't you have like a girl named Stella that's on your show?
It's a guy actually named Stella.
Oh, wow. Okay, never mind.
He doesn't appear on the show. he only speaks through sound effects.
Ah.
But we are working out an interview with him soon. No, Stella Bell, I think it would be hard for Stella Bell to only speak in sound effects.
That's why
I would want her to talk for sure.
when I had heard it, because they had never talked, so that's what I had assumed, because I was like, oh, that's what you're hanging with OGs, like, right, like kind of makes a lot of sense. So glad that could be clarified. Yeah, but I recommend listening to the show. You get a lot of information from it that are generally not covered in a lot of the Twitter spaces and some of the other pods. So I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Dan and the show and all of it. So Dan, thank you for coming on and sharing your time. I know you're a very busy man. I'm excited for the show, and I'm excited to see these previews, or I should say the film, see these previews when they are released.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everything that you're doing with Emblem. It's so much fun to watch.
I appreciate it. Maybe we'll do something here in the near future. Thank you guys for listening and launching. Hangcliffe. Or was that, yeah. Put was it Hangcliffe? Is that what the word is? Yeah.
Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. Fuck. Wow. I've been talking too much today. We'll see you guys next time.